Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We thank you for your patience. You are joining the meeting Issues in Media Leadership in the Era of COVID-19. We will be starting in approximately 3 minutes. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us on this webinar series, Issues in Media Leadership in the Era of COVID-19. This is being brought to you by the Graduate School of Media and Communications at the Aga Khan University. Your host for today will introduce the rest of the session. Ladies and gentlemen, Issues in Media Leadership in the Era of COVID-19.
Thank you very much, and a very good afternoon from Nairobi. Thank you for joining us today. We had hoped that it was going to be a hot afternoon, but that doesn't look like what the weather is out there. It is our pleasure to welcome you into this webinar, and had things been different, we would have hosted this event here at GSMC. But we've very quickly been forced to adapt to the prevailing circumstances, and now we are running this webinar on this platform. I'm certain that we can still have a robust conversation even though we are physically separated. And because of that, we are looking to you to engage by sending in questions or comments so that we can make this a lively conversation. So please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to send your questions or comments. This webinar is part of the Media Leadership class for our Year 2 students. And I have the pleasure of hosting it with my colleague from the industry, Mr. David Aduda. David is the Editor Partnerships and Special Projects at the Nation Media Group. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Nancy.
So in our panel this afternoon are people who are well known to most of us. So I'm not going to spend too much time introducing them. They all have such admirable credentials that may take us the entire hour to go through. And that's just as much time as we have. So just allow me to mention them by name, and that should suffice for the session. So we are very lucky to have with us Pamela Sitoni, the Executive Editor at the Daily Nation. Welcome, Pamela. We also have with us Ocheng Rapuro, who's the editor-in-chief at the Standard Group. Thank you very much, Ocheng, for joining us. And Christine Guku, the Training and Media Development Manager at the Media Council of Kenya. Again, thank you very much, Christine, for joining us. My name is Nancy Booker, and I'm the Director of Academic Affairs at the Graduate School of Media and Communications here at Aga University. Now, leaders around the world are currently confronted by these twin anxieties. One, how severe the coronavirus outbreak will be for the economy. And secondly, what to do to prepare. Before COVID, media houses in most parts of the world were at different stages or phases of adapting to what for them was their new normal. That is, harnessing technology to influence their strategic direction and to shape their everyday operations. At the time, technology was viewed as a chief disruptor for several media operations, forcing media houses to realign so as to take advantage of the opportunities brought about by technology. This, of course, came at a cost, and we may not have the time to get into the finer details of that today. Now, fast forward to 2020, and we have a new disruptor, the COVID-19 pandemic. The disease has infected over 5 million people today and has killed hundreds of thousands globally. In Kenya, our infection numbers have now passed the 1,000 mark. Companies have been forced, as a result of this, companies have been forced to ask people to work from home, limit human interaction, and do whatever they can to keep their people safe. And as they do all this, the elephant in the room has been, what does this do to the bottom line for those that are in business? Media organizations are front and center of this in this pandemic. They make up parts of the frontline team with the responsibility of providing news and information. And history has in fact shown that media often thrive in uncertain times. But with COVID, it is a slightly different ballgame. And those in media leadership have been thrust into the heart of decision-making and implementation of various strategies to surmount the disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. From declining revenues to changing organizational structures, changing media consumption patterns, and the rethink of the content generation strategies, media leaders are being forced to adapt quickly, even as they are confronted with an ever-existing concern, that of the safety, protection, and health of their most valuable resource, the human resource. So that synopsis situates the conversation that we're going to have over the next hour. And some of the key questions for us today are, what are the emerging issues in media leadership as a result of COVID-19? How has the practice of journalism changed amidst this pandemic? And what lessons can we learn from it to shape the future? What safety, protection, and health challenges have to be addressed if media in Kenya is to be sustained beyond COVID-19? In other words, how should media houses adapt to coexist with COVID-19? And lastly, which is a question that's very close to my heart, is how should journalism and media schools prepare students for a highly disruptive media environment? So we are keen to capture both the practical issues that we are dealing with, as well as some broader questions that may arise as a result of this conversation. So ladies and gentlemen, allow me to start with Pamela Sitoni, who's the executive editor at the Daily Nation. Pamela, welcome. So my question to you, Pam, is how has COVID-19 changed the media landscape and the current practice of journalism, and how are you adapting to this current reality?
Thank you, Nancy, and good afternoon, everybody. You've summarized it quite well, that even before COVID-19, the media was struggling all over the world, and also here in Kenya, the media was struggling to just stay afloat. And COVID-19 has presented a new battle. In a nutshell, I will sum it up as the battle for survival, and survival at different levels. At the basic level, we need to survive as a media house. We need to survive as a media fraternity. So just ensuring that we keep the workplace safe for our journalists. We keep journalists well kitted out to be able to continue playing their role in society. That means if they're going to dangerous places, You kit them up with the personal protective equipment. It means if they're in the newsroom working, they need to wear their masks, and you make those masks available. You sanitize the workplace. We've taken key measures. We've virtually emptied the newsroom, just a few people working there so that they keep a safe distance from each other. We've sent a number of staff on leave to decongest the newsroom, and we have also adopted the new normal of working from home, where we are able to carry out most of our functions from home. So that's just in terms of keeping our staff safe. And then we are also now charged with the extra responsibility of keeping Kenyans safe by giving them as much information as possible about the pandemic, equipping them with the right tools to survive as individuals, and also how to survive the declining economy, pointing out where the opportunities are. So we have to play that role as well. And then on another level of survival as media houses, the pandemic has left us completely ravaged economically. So across the media space in Kenya, you will notice that we have had to take certain drastic measures like salary cuts. And we really don't know where this is going. But what we know is that we must change. We cannot continue banking on our traditional revenue sources of circulation and advertising, because those have totally collapsed. Our circulation has probably fallen by a huge percentage, and this is across board. Our advertising revenues have dropped dramatically, and perhaps this is now the time to look for the silver lining on the digital platforms and look at where the model of advertising and circulation totally collapsed. What is the new model? So it's about rethinking what our new model is going to look like and moving very, very fast. So we see opportunities in terms of our digital papers and other products that we are coming up with. And then above everything else, as media leaders, this is really our opportunity to cement our credibility with all the information that is out there. It is the media people with the most credible information that will win the trust of our audiences, that will help us with that social contract that we have with our audiences, so that they trust us and they can bank their money on us. So that's really the new normal for the media. Thank you, Nancy.
Now I want to bring in Ochieng Rapuro, and taking up from what Pam has well elaborated, the issues that are emerging. And in this context, Ochieng, would you elaborate on the question of content generation in view of the prevailing circumstances? And two, we look at the human resource requirements for newsrooms. And three, continuing the public agenda that Pam has also alluded to. How do we, in this context, deal with this and remain true to our public agenda commitment? Ochieng?
Thank you, David. I think Pam has given a very good account of the situation that we are facing from the newsroom. And to your question, what has happened on the content front is that all the actions that have been taken by the government and the health authorities to control the spread of this disease has basically appended the traditional way in which we collect and package content and even deliver it to the consumer. The lockdowns, for example, have greatly changed the way we operate in two ways. First, it has caused a lot of restriction of movement. And as you know, traditionally, journalists have always played the role of being the witness. You know, we witness events as they occur, and we then report what we have witnessed. Now, because of the social distancing regulations or requirements, it has meant that we stop some of the ways in which we were collecting or packaging the content. From the standard here, I can tell you that for TV, for example, we stopped all OB coverage of events, and also stopped just production of live events outside the studios. Now, we left only a small window where journalists could go and report from events live. But this, as Pam has explained, it requires a lot of action, one, to protect our journalists, and therefore teach them and equip them accordingly when they are going for those assignments. And then, even when they are in those functions, we have had to develop protocols of how they will engage when they are in those few functions that we are covering live. We have had, for example, to change, and it has been a very difficult one, to stop our journalists from doing vox boxes from the streets, where you speak on a microphone and then you give the respondent to respond. Secondly, when still on the front of content generation, I'm sure you've seen a lot of live events on TV that are done virtually. Yeah? We have had to bring panels or panelists to participate in discussing issues that are topical virtually through avenues such as this one we are using, Zoom, and some things we call Ulink. On the positive side, COVID-19 itself has really provided an opportunity to ramp up content production, because the disease itself, the pandemic, and how authorities are reacting to it, and how people are reacting at personal level, and companies and its impact on households. All this is generating a lot of content, which is being consumed in particular platforms. So we have had to really rely on technology to collect and to disseminate content during this time of COVID. Now, going forward, as I have explained, COVID has changed the landscape. We have, for example, noticed a quite significant rise in consumption of content from the digital platforms. Now, much of this was due to people looking just for information about this disease. Initially, it was a very sharp rise in consumption of digital content around COVID itself. That has sort of come down a little bit, but is still higher than what we normally see on our digital platform. So the challenge we have is, how do we keep this increased interest in digital content going forward, and find new ways of generating revenue that then supports the sustainability of the media operations that we run. There are a number of ways, but for now, I think because these are just my opening remarks, I think I should end it there, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Ochieng. I now want to ask Christine to come on board, and coming from a media regulator, Christine, share with us perspectives of how the emerging situation puts the media in a context in which they can provide information and content that serves public agenda and helping the public to understand the issues, bearing in mind that the media now are challenged financially to be able to go out and do what they should be able to do. Christine?
Thank you, Aduda. Thank you, Nancy. This is really an interesting forum to be speaking about the media and COVID, and I have actually watched it curiously because being a journalist myself, I have actually asked the question, how would I behave if I was sent out to go and cover a story? Assume that the story was not necessarily a COVID-related story, but how would I make that story sellable in a situation like today where the biggest news is COVID? And what, even if I was to cover COVID, what different angle would I bring to the story? The biggest challenge that I see with journalists and media houses is remaining relevant on the agenda of public interest in as far as COVID-19 goes, but also covering other issues, because in the midst of COVID, life goes on. And because life goes on, life has to also be covered. Yes, life has been affected by COVID, it has been disrupted by COVID, but life goes on. People have to put food on the table, people get sick of different kinds of diseases which are not related to COVID. People need to access information, people need to do a whole lot of things which is all dependent on information. And so as a journalist, looking at how to behave, I think it presents them with a very big challenge. Now, coming to the regulator, one of the biggest issues that we are dealing with is fake news, information that is not verified. And the biggest excuse is that it is difficult to access information holders, experts who have the actual information with them. And when you get the information as a journalist, they seem to also have their own personal opinions and other information which is misleading, which has come from different sources. And so being discerning as a journalist to verify and to check that the information that you have received is actually accurate, and to cross-check that it is factual information, that becomes very difficult. Not too long ago, actually, about Monday, I was in Machakos with a group of journalists, and one of the biggest things they said to me was, when we are doing our work, as we collect and ask questions, we are also worrying about ourselves and wondering whether we are too exposed to the danger, wondering whether we have enough skill to actually handle such a topic. Not all journalists in the newsroom are health reporters or even have an interest in health, but they have found themselves in that situation where they have to cover a health issue, a public health issue, to the detail, and they do not have all the skills or even the interest. And so they are struggling to reconcile themselves with this new subject which has come our way, but at the same time, they have to deliver on it. And an understanding of the subject is a major challenge for them, because they need to understand the subject in order to synthesize the information and be able to disseminate it in even a simple language, in understandable language, in language that speaks to the needs of the information seekers, which is our audience. So there's that whole debate and discussion among journalists. how do we package this information so that it meets the information needs of our audiences. The mode of delivery is really, really a very big issue, because not many journalists are familiar with this internet platform, which is the one sure way of gathering information, disseminating information. They don't even seem to have good enough skills to interview people when they are using a phone. They're not able to work the app properly. They're not even able to manage interviews on Zoom and so on. So there is something there that needs to happen, probably in their training, and also in the way they collect the content, package it, and deliver it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine, and we'll be coming back to some of the issues that you have raised. So one of the things that we have witnessed, from the news reports that we receive, is that there is some sort of devolution of the sort of content that you would ordinarily get as far as news is concerned. We are now seeing a lot more journalists reporting right from their local locations, or wherever it is that they are. So more or less a decentralization of news coverage, of news content. And one of the questions that we are being asked here from one of the participants is, and I think I'll direct this to Pamela, is, has the pandemic proven that media can still thrive without the heavy focus on political stories?
That's interesting because 2 or so weeks ago, I'd have said, yes, it has. My own view has always been that the biggest story is what I find to be the most important story. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a political story as the stereotype goes out there. What the pandemic has shown us, and I think shown the whole world, is that something like a disease can actually shut down the world. So some of the things that we thought were very, very important stop to matter when it comes to something that affects life at such a large scale. And for a moment, the pandemic took over our lives completely, and we would not think beyond anything, because it affected even the politics. If you ask me, the politicians in this country have literally gone underground. You don't see them. So obviously that will not generate political news for us. But in the last few days, we realized that as we worry about the pandemic, there's also a lot of political activity in this country. And some of the decisions that are being made right now will have ramifications on our lives, even past COVID. And we have to take that on board as well. So we will not completely forget the politics, but I insist that as media houses, we have to continue focusing on what we think is the most important issue of the day, and this changes every day.
Thank you, Pam. And a question to you and to Rapuro, and maybe Rapuro can go faster, then Pam can come back to it, is that most journalists are now working from home and are not using the normal equipment from their media houses. What equipment does a journalist need to effectively work from home and still deliver quality reports? And for you two who are in a leadership position, how are you capacitating your journalists to be able to work effectively and efficiently from home? So Ochieng first.
Thank you, Nancy. When this pandemic initially hit our shores, and the first case was announced by the government together with all the measures to contain it. As Pam had indicated earlier, the first thing that we did in the newsrooms was to empty the newsrooms almost completely in order to comply with the social distancing requirements, and also to keep movement to the minimum. And that meant working from home. Now, in the current environment, quite a number of us journalists have personal tools, what you can call the tools of the trade. We have laptops, we have cameras, we have the kind of facilitation that is required to deliver these things. And many of us, luckily, have things like Wi-Fi at home, and therefore that facilitates the communication that needs to happen on the digital platforms. So what we did from our end was to just map out the entire newsroom and the resources that each one of us as journalists had, and therefore could use of the location. And this went to the extent that a number of journalists who were then found not to have the necessary tools like laptops or personal computers, the company had to change its policy, and actually we got approval to carry computers, desktop computers, to journalists' homes. Yeah, computers were carried to the homes of journalists, especially the ones that work in production, like the copy editors. So apart from that, what we did then was to go ahead and then supply the journalists with what they need to have a network that can deliver the content back to the newsroom. So we went to the extent of agreeing on an amount of money that we disbursed to our journalists for purposes of sustaining their internet access points, whether it's a Wi-Fi or through their phones, or if they have any other means that requires paying for. So, and this particularly, initially there was a lot of challenges with things not working well, but we have since found a way in which we assist the journalists to log on to the system from remotely and be able to supply the content that is required. Now, just one thing before I finish. These kind of arrangements have really posed another serious challenge to us, which is the security and the integrity of our systems. Because when you take this,
sorry, we seem to have lost. Rapuro, are you back online? We kind of lost you towards the end.
Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me? Am I back?
Rapuro, I can hear you well. I think it's Nancy that has the problem.
I can hear Rapuro too.
So, you can hear him?
Yes, both of them can hear me.
I think the problem is on our end.
Yeah, so I was just finishing up by saying that this desegregation of our staff into different locations for purposes of creating and delivering the content has posed a serious problem of the security of our digital properties and also the integrity of the system that we use to deliver the content. But these are what you call teething problems that we are dealing with as we go.
Thank you, Achieng. Pamela, would you like to respond?
Yeah, without adding to what Rapuro has said, pretty much the same thing at the Nation Media Group. We have ensured that people have the tools that they need to continue doing their work, including carrying desktops home. So what I want to say is that it's amazing how easy it has turned out to be, because we still have maintained our newsroom routine. We have our morning docket meeting, which is very well attended and very participatory, and everybody logs in from wherever they are. We are able to plan the day, and then we have further meetings in the day, again, online, either on the telephone or by Zoom. And we pretty managed to put together the products that we have always done. So our productivity has not been affected by this new normal at all. And I think our journalists have been well supported. Where there are issues, they raise them. We have an IT department that is always on standby, especially at the peak production time. And there's a very open channel of communication where we are sharing experiences. And if somebody's internet goes down, somebody else will quickly take up that page and complete it. And somehow we are able to get by.
Thank you. So there seems to be a lot of feedback on the question on the issue around credibility of the content. Questions, or comments to the effect that because of the Zoom meetings that we are holding with sources, this has hindered a full ability by media to hold power to account as journalists' options to push back on misleading responses and to keep, some of their sources on track has lost. So, what does this do to credibility? And this question also seems to be coming to us from Uganda as well. It has taken away the journalistic role of asking questions, interrogating, and delving deeper into, just ensuring that your story is credible before you publish. Would you say that, this has been affected? Pamela?
Of course, Nancy, I don't think as a journalist, there's something that can be better than a face-to-face interview or a face-to-face conversation at all. But as I said earlier, and Rapuro also emphasized, our first responsibility is to ensure the safety of our journalists. So we will not put them in line of danger just for the sake of getting a story. And if it means then that we settle for what is second best, which is using technology to get some of that information, then we have to. But that aside, I think there's still opportunities to conduct interviews safely. I have done some myself, and I think I'm still well. What I notice about our modern day journalists is there's a lot of fear, and understandably so, about this disease. So people are hesitant to actually go out into the field. So we will need a few brave people. We have had a few of our brave guys going even into the wards that are housing corona victims. And for as long as you're secure, your safety, your health can be kind of guaranteed. You have the right kits. You should be able to still do good stories without worrying too much.
Rapuro, do you have a response to that? To the question?
I think Pam has spoken to that question very effectively. When you are in a leadership position of the type that we have, of course, people are looking up to you, what kinds of decisions you make. And as she has said, no story for us is more important than the life of a journalist. But in the present world, I think what we have lost in this crisis or the pandemic, I can just call it the flare, because I believe that the technology that we have is good enough to even vigorously conduct an interview remotely. The phone, which Christine referred to earlier, is not a new instrument in our lives. We have had the phone for almost 100 years in human history, and journalists have always used the phone to conduct interviews in a regular basis. And currently, there are new tools that have come, like the one we are using now. We have brought a lot of public officials onto our platforms, especially the live ones like TV, using these technologies. And we have asked them hard questions, and they have had to respond. I think just a small snippet, the fact that this pandemic brought us to this corner has also opened up the minds and the hearts of those who occupy public positions to realize that they need to speak to the ordinary citizens and hold their hands during the crisis. And for this reason, I can tell you, I have seen a more willingness to open up and speak to journalists, if not we the editors, by public officials through these new technology-driven channels. So what we cannot deny we have lost is the flair of a face-to-face interview, but there is still a huge chance, in my view, more than 95%, to hold people accountable and to ask hard questions. And we also have, through technology, we are here at Standard, we do something called fact-checking, in which we debunk all the false news that is spreading through the digital platforms during this period. And we have tools. If somebody is saying this picture was taken in Mombasa, and for example, there was a picture that was showing Muslims breaking the fast in groups and eating in groups. And we have tools that you can use to actually tell you the source of that picture and how old it is. So these are still things or tools that help us hold people accountable and ensure just hygiene of the content that we put out.
Okay, thank you, Rapuro. A follow-up question in regard to what Pam had talked about, in terms of investigative journalism that requires movement, in view of the fact that journalists can no longer move to location easily, what the impact of that on investigations and what you call one-on-one account, what the public would want to relate with one-on-one? What is your response on that, Pam?
I think it's okay.
Thank you, David. First of all, the media in this country has been classified under essential services, which means that if you are a genuine practicing journalist, you should have your work ID, and you should also have a letter from your employer stating that you are employed in the media. That gives you access, unfettered access to basically any part of the country, and your mobility is not in any way restricted. But I know that with the current restrictions of movement and particularly the curfew, sometimes practicing that kind of journalism or even some sort of investigative journalism that will put you in certain places might be dangerous for journalists, particularly at night. As Rapuro said, the current guys in power in some of these departments, including the police, are really willing to actually work with the media. So if, say, you want to do a story like we had recently about Nairobi by curfew, it is possible that you can organize to have a police escort just to ensure your safety that will still enable you to go around Nairobi at night and capture the scenes that you see. It just goes down to planning and also to partnerships and to who you're working with so that you can get it correct. And of course, if you're going around with the police and you are hoping to bust some policemen doing illegal things, you can be sure you won't get that story. So that's the downside to it. But by and by, in the circumstances, I think it is still possible for journalists to put out exceptional work, even with the COVID limitations.
Thank you very much, Pam. Yes, Rapuro.
Yes, just to add on to what Pam has said and that's what you call on-the-ground journalism. My experience is that even long before COVID, what we have been doing with our investigative journalists is to skill them in matters digital, in how to use digital tools to dig up information, because most of the information currently can be found on digital platforms. So a lot of training has gone to that space, and there have been a lot of international training programs recently for investigative journalists, how to use even Google Photos to just map somebody's digital footprint, how to, for example, just make a phone call safely outside the purview of those who snoop and want to record our calls when we are in that space. And also, there have been created in the technology space avenues through which I can send a document to Pam and have the comfort that somebody is not going to break through and get what I've sent. So those tools, together with just the fact that investigative journalism has always depended or heavily on whistleblowers. So long as whistleblowers are still assured that they can communicate with us safely and without exposing themselves, I think there is a real, still a good chance that we can practice investigative journalism, not to the fullest extent that we would like to, but to an extent that adds value in that space.
Nancy, I'd like to make a comment on the investigative bit and finding news, if I may.
Yes, please, go ahead, Kristen.
You know, every time I listen to the journalists who go to the national briefing, it seems the freedom of those who are giving out information, the information holders at the conferences and at the national briefing, have a limitation as to what they want to disseminate. And so it's up to the journalists to now go slightly beyond whatever information they have collected. If they have collected numbers of women, numbers of men that have been affected, numbers of children, the different locations, I think they need to just interrogate the little, I could almost call it the minimum information that they receive at national briefings. It's up to them to now go one step ahead and interrogate. Why are these the figures that we are being given? I think on Monday or Tuesday, the national briefing gave out a big file with a lot of data on where the disease has erupted, who has been captured, and so on and so forth. And it had a lot of news angles that any journalist could actually have sat down and done almost 200 stories from there. And that's the point at which I want to say the journalists need to go beyond the minimum information that is being shared, and they can actually get it from people who are well researched, people who are well knowledgeable. They can go to scientists, they can go to medical doctors, and you see, it's not only the people who are responding to it that have the information. Most doctors have now read widely about COVID-19 and can give you fairly verifiable information that you can trust. So I think for journalists, they need to go just that one step ahead to say, okay, this is all that we have received, but we can go a little further to make it rich, so to speak, so that I'm not just getting 66 people have been found to be infected in the last 24 hours, so that, the story goes beyond just that one figure. The one figure is not the only one that makes the headline. It is analyzing that one figure that now will make the headline. So I think for journalists, they need to go just a step further. And that doesn't even mean that you have to go face to face with this researcher. You could actually do that research on email. You can do it on phone. You can do it on different platforms and still gain that information from a credible person. The beauty about the internet is that you don't have to get all the information from Kenya. You can get it from Ghana, you can get it from the US, you can get it from Australia. As long as you're able to verify who is this person that I am asking the information, and you're able to do a background check. And I like what Rapuro says, that they actually have all that set up for fact checking and verifying information. So it's really easy for the journalists to actually diversify the information that they have received, diversify the content that they have received in terms of analyzing it. When they just repeat what it is that the minister has said, it sits in the boring corner. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. And I'd like us to now talk about health and safety of journalists. It seems to be coming up quite a lot in our Q&A box, and we had planned to ask a question on this. So as the pandemic intensifies, the risk to journalists' mental health is mounting. And one of the questions or comments that we received from Uganda yesterday was that it was reported that a Vision Group accountant committed suicide after a pay cut announcement. We are yet to verify that information, but it came from a journalist in Uganda. So Christine, to you, what safety, protection, and health challenges do we have to address if media in Kenya and even in the region is to be sustained beyond COVID-19?
Nancy, that question is as tall as Mount Kenya, but I'll make an effort at chipping little bits of it. Right now, I've actually thought to myself that this is a time when the safety of the journalist comes first, before they even start to gather the information, because they have to be in good health for them to gather the information and to keep the media house running in terms of content. The simple, straight answer right now I can say is, at least at the Media Council, we have put a mechanism where journalists can actually get some trauma counseling and guidelines on how to conduct themselves when they have covered this very difficult subject. Perhaps they've even covered a story and known about a person who has died of COVID, and the scare that it just causes to them as individuals, because at the end of the day, the journalist is a human being. Looking at the going beyond COVID, we have huge lessons to learn, especially for the media houses. For the media houses, I think they need to start drawing different budgets, which now put a larger proportion of their spending on safety of the journalist. I'm thinking about the masks. I have had the conversation with journalists in Nairobi and outside Nairobi, and they've asked me a difficult question whose answer I actually don't have. And now maybe I might put it to Rapuro and Pamela and say, the surgical masks that we are using are prescribed to be used for only 2 hours. A journalist is out there for a whole day using the same mask, interviewing different people. The recommendation, even from World Health Organization, is after you've used it to interview one person, discard it. So I don't know how many they are getting in a day to go and conduct interviews. That's one. But then I'm also thinking about the media equipment itself. I'm thinking of microphones. The recommendation is that every journalist who goes out to conduct a face-to-face interview needs to have 2 microphones, one for themselves and one for the interviewee. How possible is that, really? And then again, maybe for the microphones, they could work with the windshields. So you need to have a bag of windshields on the side, that sponge which is on the outside, so that after you interview one person, you actually discard that one because of, you know, just the risk that exists in your equipment being contaminated. I'm also looking at it and saying that teams that go out for electronic reporting have been reduced to a bare minimum of 2. The one who is going to ask the questions and the one who carries the equipment. Say, for example, for our TV crew, they've now all been reduced to 2 people. And I'm wondering to myself whether that is affecting how the collection of news happens. Because when you had a bigger team, people had different roles. And now I'm keen to find out how has this being, you know, smaller teams affected the media houses. It's one of those things that they need to think beyond COVID. And you know, there's almost that attitude that COVID is, we are going to wake up one morning and there'll be no COVID. But I'm remembering a certain scientist who was featured not too long ago on speaking on behalf of World Health Organization. And he said, we may have to accommodate COVID as the new normal, as a disease that we are going to be with for a long time. Now, be that the case, then how do we adjust to everything? I remember there may be lessons that we need to learn from HIV and how we report it, how we reported it, and how we have now come to live with HIV. Much as the difference between HIV and COVID is that COVID is highly communicable and very easy to transmit. So it's something that we need to sit back and think as the media, how do we readjust to having COVID as a permanent fixture in our daily lives, in the stories that we will be telling every day. I'm even thinking about disinfecting of the equipment that we go with. If a crew has to go with a car, are they disinfecting the inside of the car? Apart from the inside of the car, the camera, the microphones, the video, the audio recorders, there's all these things. And then you think to yourself also the pens, and then has certain types of behavior we need to begin adopting. I know there are people who have a habit, and it's a really nasty habit, of biting their pens as they think and so on, and that leaves saliva on the pen. So, you know, there's all these things that we need to begin adjusting to as we do conduct our business as journalists. In terms of the mental health, we've actually conducted 3 interventions with journalists, especially from Kilifi, the ones who had contact with a deputy governor who had tested positive at the time. And so all that a journalist needs to do right now is to just put in an email, or a media house can, if they feel that they have somebody who needs that kind of counseling or that kind of support, all they need to do is just send an email to info@mediacouncil.or.ke, and we will respond, because we have put a team out there. We have got together with partners who are helping us to do the counseling for the journalists. And even when the journalists have not been traumatized as such, as seen anything nasty, I think it's really important for them to even be prepared psychologically. So there are things which I think they need to be introduced to, that while you're doing this coverage, you're likely to come across this, and it will be shocking. And we can begin to, if you like, to debrief them after covering COVID. And remember, they're getting all sorts of information, scary information, which scares them at a human level. So we need to also think about the mental health of the journalists. Thank you.
Based on what Christine has just said, I would want to ask Pam and Rapuro to give a comment on what specifically media organizations have done to deal with the mental health of journalists, and in respect to issues of briefing and debriefing, and also assisting those who have
mental challenges are on the verge of breaking down. I'll ask Rapuro to start, then Pamela can join after.
Yes, thanks, David. The issue of physical and mental health of our journalists is one that we have given top priority because, as I said, no story for us is worth a human life or somebody's welfare. And first, from the operational front, we at the Standard, what we did immediately this disease was announced to have come within our borders was to work in collaboration with health experts and also our insurers to develop a protocol for operation in the new environment. And so we have a protocol that covers the behavioral end of things, how journalists are to behave when they are practicing during this time of COVID. And so things like what Christine is referring to are very well covered in that protocol. The first thing we said, we do not, for example, need to be going to the field to do vox pop, asking people questions and giving the microphones to answer a single microphone. On the microphones, for example, we have a protocol. These journalists are given sanitizers that they use immediately. They have used their microphones at a function. They are supposed to spray the equipment, and also when they arrive back to the office, the vehicles that they have used is cleaned both inside and outside, just to make sure that the next team that gets into the vehicle or uses the vehicle is not affected. But I can tell you the biggest challenge here is human behavior. We have, for example, in that protocol said, no journalist will go to practice journalism in an area that is a point of extreme exposure without the permission of the managing editors. But the journalists are somehow, I don't know whether some of them think they are superhuman. So we've had journalists go to these places without informing us. And that has forced us to really react in a certain way in order to restore the integrity of our system. I'll give you a quick example. There was a case in Western Kenya in which somebody was said to have died of COVID and was buried in very controversial circumstances in the middle of the night. And so we sent our journalists to go and talk to the governor of that county and the health authorities there, just to hold them to account as to why they did that, and get stories from them, of course, using the protocols. So the journalists left our Kisumu office, went to the county headquarters, talked to the governor, and then they jumped into their vehicles and went into the home of the said victims and started interviewing people in that home, which was very surprising. And when we realized that, of course, we had to send all those journalists into isolation and to clean whatever equipment they had used. But the thing is this, we then made available to them psychological support, that you could go to this place and get psychological support. Of all those 4 journalists who are on that trip, none of them took the offer. Yeah? So they just stayed away from the office for those 14 days. And our approach was that after those 14 days, should the people they got in touch with, who are all quarantined, the sister to the deceased and the son to the deceased whom they interviewed, we had made arrangements that if those 2 people test positive for COVID, then we will also ensure that all these journalists are tested for COVID. Luckily, all of them tested negative, and we had to allow these journalists back to the office without the testing. But the psychological support is there and is provided for, and at the standard, and I know the nation has similar arrangements, we have a standing arrangement of doctors 24 hours, one just dealing with the disease, and the other one ready to deal with the psychological impact of it.
Thank you, Rapuro. Now, as we come to the end, because time is not on our side, I want to ask a quick question. What we've seen in the media in recent times is pay cut, and employees are, taking this differently. There are possibilities of employees being restive. How do we, as media managers, socialize journalists to understand that perhaps they may not be able to get the same salary they used to get, and that they have to work under these conditions and still deliver? So, Pam, what is the plan around helping journalists to live with the emerging circumstances of reduced earnings, reduced incentives, and yet they're required to deliver? Pam?
Thanks, David, for that. As you know, both you and I are victims of that particular measure. I think it's incumbent upon us as media leaders to help our journalists understand how the journalism business works. And at the moment, it's a very straightforward model. We sell newspapers mostly. We sell advertising on TV and in the newspapers, and the money we make is used to pay our salaries and to pay for other operational costs. Now, if that money reduces, it is not anybody's wish to give people a pay cut, because at the Nation Media Group, for example, the biggest earners got the biggest pay cut. So even whoever came up with the final decision, the CEO in this case, he is the biggest victim of that decision. But the thing is to look at how to cushion our people, how to cushion not just our journalists, but all our staff. So making arrangements, for example, to get some breaks from our loan commitments. And we all know that journalism is not one of the best paying careers, and therefore when somebody takes away a chunk of that little salary that you have, it can really push you to desperation. But on our part, what we are doing is just getting our people to understand that this was not a decision informed by malice, but it was a decision dictated by the circumstances. You can only spend what you have. And when that money is not there, then you have to, even in your own house, when you don't have that money, you have to look at what to reduce so that you can keep surviving. You cannot insist that you must have tea and bread every day when you can't afford it. So it just came to that for the media houses, and that had to be done. Of course, we have to realize that we all have a stake in the company. And if you all look at it as something that you're part of, then you know that when the days get better, things will improve and we can all move together. But some of the things we're doing, and like you're saying, this can also even push people towards that mental breakdown that you're talking about, is just reaching out to people at a very personal level, at a very individual level. I've had people call me to ask me how they can restructure their finances, for example, and we just talk about it in a very humane way. So remaining human beings, even in the face of these circumstances, and learning that we are in it together, and that if we stay in it together, we can sail and cross over to the other side. So that's really how we are dealing with it. But we cannot promise what is not there, and we cannot pay out what is not there. So it's just for everybody to really be convinced that that is the situation. And maybe just to add that this was voluntary. You had to sign to say, yes, I accept these conditions, because the alternative is to say, no, this is where we part ways, because I don't believe the company should reduce my pay because of COVID. But luckily, I think most of the people realized that this is just a situation that was unavoidable and had to be done. And so far, I don't see any bad blood. I don't see people being less productive because we are going to get a salary cut. And then a last thing about journalism again, I think most of the good journalists who are in journalism are not in it for want of other opportunities elsewhere, but they're in it because they believe that what they're doing is a service to the public, and they believe in it, and they're doing it from their spirit. So it is not so much about the money, but the joy that practicing journalism gives you. So for that, we are still committed to this cause, and I am sure there'll be better days ahead.
Thank you very much, Pam. So this is my last question to you all in the interest of time. Now, some have said that with the right approach, the COVID-19 crisis can become an opportunity for companies to create even more value and positive societal impact. So for you, Pam, Rapuro, and Christine, do you see such opportunities for journalism and media? And if you do, then what do these look like for you?
Should I go first?
Yes, please, Pam.
So as I said at the beginning, we think there's a silver lining on the digital platform. We've seen our colleagues in the West do much better in terms of their online subscriptions for their publications and their e-papers. We are slowly getting there. And there are also opportunities to do a lot of things as media companies online. If you just look out in the general populace,
So we seem to have lost Pam. We seem to have lost Pam. So Rapuro, do you want to respond to this and then turn it over to Christine? And hopefully Pam will join us in a minute or so.
Yes, okay. Yes, I can step in as Pam reconnects. Just to the point that Pam was talking to, the fact that we found ourselves in this situation has caused a lot of pain, including those that we just talked about, pay. But there is opportunity. The opportunity we've seen is in really fast forwarding what we have been calling going digital. This has been a forced transition to the digital space, and we have seen how our audiences and consumers have also changed to align themselves with the new situation. For example, because most of the consumers have gone onto the digital platforms, this has offered or afforded us a huge opportunity to just collect data and study keenly consumer behavior on these platforms, which is not quite possible on a platform like print. So here we have, for example, what we call a captive audience. It's an audience you can, in real time, see what they do when they come to your site, what they consume, how long they stay, do they come back or do they not, so these opportunities for us is what we are really focusing on what lessons we can learn there, and therefore just polish up our digital execution, including introducing new digital products that then offer us a chance or a good chance at acquiring new sustainability paths to the future. As Pam said, the media model has been very direct. Sell content through platforms like print, and also sell advertising on both electronic and print platforms. Now, what we are seeing currently is that there are multiple opportunities to gain first credibility, play the public service role that is ours traditionally, and also to then ride on that to make money. I have myself been taking a lot of time looking at what's happening in the digital space, and I can tell you that, for example, just the tool that we have for fact-checking is one that has become extremely popular, and the consumer comes there just to check something they have seen on Twitter or circulating in their WhatsApp groups to check the veracity of it. Such are the opportunities we have, and we are looking forward to deepening our presence in those spaces, including other new revenue streams, like considering selling just the content on digital platform. These are the things that we are looking at, and we are going to test going forward in this space.
Thank you very much. Christine, can you also speak to that?
Yeah, sure. I'm actually looking at this picture from two sides, one from the journalist side, but then I'm also thinking about us who train those journalists, so that we are not training them, so to speak, old school, and we are expecting them to operate in a new world, new environment kind of place where they are working. One of the things that I would say to the journalists is think of ways to diversify your income. You have skills, you are storytellers, you have skills not just to write news stories. You have skills because you are a storyteller. And so I'm thinking that you need to begin to spread your wings, not only to write for the one media house that gives you a straight pay slip and has a contract with you. There's many other places where you can do dissemination of information, which is verified. I mean, right now with the internet, you can even begin your own publication, which you may not necessarily compete with your employer. But at the same time, I also want to encourage journalists to look for what is called passive income. Invest a little bit of your money into something that is going to bring you money without you necessarily having to work very hard. And those passive income streams can really save the day. And you will not find yourself in the same situation where you are today. The second and most important thing is you really must equip yourself as a journalist. This is the time when every journalist realized that if they had a laptop, they didn't need to depend on the one from the office. And so you need to equip yourself with tools that support the trade that you're in. So look for good equipment that you can equip yourself with. In the event that you have to go and do a story without depending on an employer's tools, then it works for you. You add premium to yourself, you add more value to yourself. The other thing I now want to look at is us who are training the journalists, we need to also go back to class and know how to train using this different platform. Many of us are very used to, and we know how to speak to Kamau and Jane and Peter as we see them, and to tell them, go and take this photograph and bring it back. And showing them how to use that camera when we are sitting face to face with them. But in the event that you have to teach a course like photography and production without having to sit next to the piece of equipment, how do you guide such a class? So it's time now to begin to review how we are building the capacity of the journalists of today, who is going to be covering some very interesting stories in an interesting abnormal time. We need to also begin to think of how to enhance consumption and understanding of the content that we use as teachers. We have prepared content which is deliverable at its best in a face-to-face situation. But we need to start thinking, what if I had to deliver this in a situation where I am not face-to-face with the student? What do I do? And we need to now put a little more emphasis in preparing for advanced situations when we are training journalists. I know we have one module in one whole unit which just deals with the safety of the journalist, and we just tell them about, some very basic kinds of unsafe situations where they can be reporting. COVID has opened our eyes to a totally different kind of safety in as far as our work goes. So it's important for even us as trainers to start to think, how do I train a journalist to be all round and to even be alert and alive to something like the pandemic? Finally, refining research skills for journalists is like top priority. I know they learn how to do research, they learn how to do investigative stories, but we need to go a step deeper for them to do real well done research for their stories. That's how they will now pick the information that is given on the face value and then go deeper to now give it meaning, to now give it life, such that it translates to the audience. What does this mean for me at an individual level? I think with that, we can proceed, Aduda and Dr. Nancy. We can proceed to go and start reviewing the curricula in the colleges, because I think this is of absolute importance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine, for that challenge. And clearly that is something that we need to be able to take up from this point on. Now, Pamela, you get to have the last word. Technology has favored you. We lost you for a moment there, and so you get a chance to have the last word, just like you had the first word on this discussion. So over to you, Pam, and then I'll hand over to my colleague David to close the session.
Sorry, you lost me. These are the challenges of the new normal. No, so I think Rapuro has kind of completed where I was going in terms of the opportunities we have on the digital platforms. And maybe just to add a bit to what Christine has said, the challenge that she has thrown to you, the trainers of the future journalists. Then the journalist that is required today is not the journalist of our yesteryears, where we learned to go to events and record and come back and report what we saw and what we had. It will have to be a journalist who helps people to think and helps society to make, to make decisions based on the things that are going on, to interpret decisions and to interpret issues for society. It would have to be a journalist who is more committed to research more, to do more legwork, and to think a lot harder. So give us that kind of journalist, and I think they will still fit in the newsroom of the future, even post-COVID. And just as a final word, I'm still very optimistic that the media will get out of this. It may not be very soon, but we are confident that there are better days coming ahead. Thanks.
Thank you, Pam. That's very strong. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, time is not on our side. So I want to take this opportunity to bring this to an end, but I want to thank everyone who's been on board. I want to start by thanking Pamela Sitoni, Ochieng Rapuro, Christine Nguko, our panelists, who have ably elaborated issues on the table, brought in new insights that have really helped to boost the discussion. Now we've got over 60 participants on this session. We thank you very much for joining us. And from the school, we are saying that this is the first in a series of such kind of webinars, which will be brought to you so that we are able to discuss emerging issues. We thank everyone who has been here. We want to thank the school itself for convening this. And I want to thank my colleague, Dr. Nancy Buka, who's been coordinating this. And I want to wish everyone God's mercies. Stay safe, stay sane. Until we meet next time, thank you very much. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks and
Thank you
goodbye.
very much. Thank you very much.